I'm Carolyn Beeler, and I was recently in Ukraine reporting on what is likely to be one of the longest lasting impacts of the war there, the impact of combat on the environment.
In Ukraine today, a massive dam was destroyed along the front lines of the war. Floodwaters are now inundating towns and villages.
In early June, the Kakhovka Dam on the Dnipro River burst, and water from a reservoir the size of the Great Salt Lake in Utah was rushing down that river. It flooded lots of towns and villages, and as it was flowing down the riverbank, it also picked up a lot of contamination, like oil and landmines. At the time, the government was calling it the worst environmental disaster since Chernobyl in Ukraine. And I think for the first time, it really focused international attention on the environmental costs of the war in Ukraine. So you have this old school trench warfare happening all along the front lines that's digging up soil, that's mowing down forests, that's triggering forest fires near the front lines. You have industrial sites and oil depots that were heavily targeted, especially in the beginning of the war, that then leach oil and industrial chemicals into the soil, into the air, and also into the groundwater.
On just the fifth day of the war, Russian forces bombed a home improvement store on the edge of the city. Since then, its twisted wreckage has stood largely untouched. I step over shards of glass with ecologist Katerina Polyanska.
Be careful with your shoes.
Everything there had been exploded, caught on fire. So paint, building materials, insulation, a lot of plastics. And scientists are concerned that the dust and ash and debris that is still sitting there is likely harmful to human health. This is especially concerning in Ukraine, where asbestos was only outlawed in recent years, and so there's still a lot of it in buildings. Asbestos is a known carcinogen, and so this dust is making a lot of the rubble that's around Ukraine now toxic.
The government in Kyiv is tracking the environmental damage and also coming up with a dollar figure on those incidents.
The government of Ukraine estimates that about $56 billion of damages to the environment have been done so far. There are a handful of environmental NGOs, both inside and outside of Ukraine, that are also keeping track of damages. All of these efforts are with the aim of eventually being able to win some sort of compensation from Russia after the conflict ends.
Ukraine has been saddled with an unfortunate distinction. It's now believed to have more landmines than any country in the world. Nearly 1,000 civilians have been killed or injured by mines and unexploded ordnance since early 2022.
Both Russia and Ukraine are using landmines, especially at the front lines, to fortify their positions and prevent advances from opponents. There are mines and unexploded ordnance all over the country, especially from the early days of the war when Russian troops were trying to push toward Kyiv. There are landmines all around the capital region as a result of that. There's also been a lot of agricultural land that's been off limits because of landmines and also open combat. So about 20% of Ukraine's farmlands last year were off limits. Some experts estimate that it'll take some 700 years to clear all that land with the current capacity that Ukraine has.
Tetiana Samolenko used to have a root cellar at her home in the village of Damidiev. Now her potatoes have a swimming pool.
It was interesting to visit the site of a dam on the Irpin River that was damaged in the early days of the war, and the flooding that resulted from that has been credited with helping prevent Russian troops from entering Kyiv as they were aiming to do. It was kind of heartening to see that the resulting lake and kind of wetlands area that was created by that flooding, which is still there, is now actually liked by the nearby residents. There were people fishing and walking and biking along that lake. So it was perhaps a silver lining of this idea of nature as a weapon of war.